Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Nick.
And I'm Alistair.
And this fortnight, we'll be taking to the high seas with popular pirate comedy Our Flag Means Death, and then investigating organised crime on behalf of other organised crime with new Image Comics series Newburn. But first, Alistair, what else have you been intaking this fortnight?
So I went to the cinema to see a film called Tar that's just come out. In the week it was revealed that it was been nominated for quite a few Oscars, including Best Picture and Best Actress for star Cate Blanchett. It's a film about a famous composer and conductor leading the Berlin Philharmonic Orchestra whose bullying and manipulation is exposed, leading to their downfall. It's a sort of Me Too of a prominent woman story. Yeah, and it's a really captivating film. I recommend this. It's quite dark, but if that's your sort of thing, then yeah, you'll probably enjoy it. It is very much a performance vehicle. I mean, it's all about Cate Blanchett's performance as Tar, which is, yeah, phenomenal. She really embodies the character, gives it lots of layers, emotional complexity. Yeah, phenomenal performance. But there's a bit more to it than just the performance. I think that is kind of the main thing. It's really, really, atmospheric. You can really get sort of like lost in this sort of dark, riveting drama. So it's certainly a film I'd recommend.
This did look like among the more interesting of the Oscar films this year that I haven't yet seen, which it turns out is nearly all of them, because yeah, I thought I might have had a shot at seeing a few more of the old nominations, but when I actually looked at them, I just got a bit, well, okay, I've seen Everything Everywhere All at Once, and that's almost it. Well, it was a bit disappointing for me, but yeah, this looked like one of the more interesting ones, a sort of classic musical breakdown story in the style of Whiplash.
Yeah, there's a lot of similarities there. In fact, there's even a scene that takes place at Juilliard School of Music when Tar goes to give a masterclass, so there's overlap there. So yeah, I think it's one of my favourite of the films I've seen so far. I think apart from Everything Everywhere All at Once, which was my favourite film of last year, I thought it was, yeah, absolutely brilliant. I don't know, sort of very modern story, touching on like contemporary politics, obviously, like Me Too is brought in there, as well as issues of racism, class. These sort of very contemporary issues are mixed in, but it's very political, but it's not like people have like long monologues about politics. It's sort of woven into the sort of plot and character in a way that keeps the film always entertaining. It's kind of got this sort of dark psychological drama tension running through it that it doesn't really let up. Even though it's exploring these like big issues, it's still, and it's quite long, it's like about 2.5 hours, but it maintains this sort of tension throughout, which is one of the things that makes it so good.
Yeah, much as I've been mean about many films for being too long, I could live with it as long as it, actually keeps up the tension and the interest. Yeah,
it's much shorter than Avatar 2, which is also Best Picture nominated as well. Yeah, bizarrely. But yeah, we really, I don't know, I feel I missed...
Well, once again,
Oscar predictions, nothing for The Wonder, which I was very surprised by. Didn't expect Everything Everywhere All at Once to do so well.
The Wonder, I guess I'm not that surprised it didn't get a Best Picture, as I'm not sure it quite transcended and flew as a whole film, but I'm surprised Florence Pugh didn't get a Best Actress for that.
No, I'm very surprised by that as well. I thought that was a great performance. That is unfortunate. But, Oscar predictions, typically wide of the mark, but that's just now traditional.
But yeah, and I'm glad Tar is good. I think, has Cate Blanchett had one of these sort of big Oscar showcases before? She seems like somebody would have done, but I'm not film enough to know if she has.
That's a good point, actually. Someone asked me the other day, and I was like, I'm sure she's won an Oscar already, but I'm not sure what for.
And now, time for everyone's favourite audio medium.
Yeah.
On podcast Googling.
Actually,
yeah, she has won both Best Actress and Best Supporting Actress in her life, so fair enough.
This could be her third Oscar.
Recognition has been achieved for Cate Blanchett.
Yeah, wins. God, she's won 166 awards.
Yeah, she's won an Oscar twice and been nominated for them 8 times, including the new one for Tar. Fair enough, she'll be okay. We can stop worrying about her.
Oh yeah, everyone said Blue Jasmine was very good, which she won for, and The Aviator is good. It's a flawed film, but it's another Martin Scorsese picture.
Was that the DiCaprio one?
Yeah, it's the DiCaprio one. It was part of DiCaprio's phase. He said he wanted to play all the great American characters, so he did The Aviator, Howard Hughes, he did Great Gatsby, and he did like J. Edgar Hoover. There were some others.
I didn't realise that was a thing, actually. I remember those films, but I didn't realise they were part of a series.
This is what he said initially. Sort of thematically linked. I'm not sure if he's still doing that.
The other great American character, sad man with frozen penis lost in wilderness.
I think that might be a real person, though. I can't remember. It's been a long time since I saw that. Since I saw the Revenant, the Frozen Wasteland film. That's a long film that's quite slow paced.
It does just about keep the atmosphere up, but yeah, that was a long one.
Yeah, in short, I can recommend Tar. The other thing I liked about it is that there's a lot about classical music in there, and it's quite complex because obviously these are like elite classical music performers and experts leading their field, talking in detail, but it somehow managed to keep everything really accessible.
Yeah, as seen on such shows as The West Wing, as long as you're aware of the undercurrents and why it matters to the characters, I guess it doesn't matter if you don't actually understand all the words.
Yeah, that's a very good comparison. Anyway, I've begun my project of watching the Oscar films. Nick, what have you been up to recently?
I read through all 5 volumes in the Reckless series. This is a series of graphic novels by Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips, with colours by Jacob Phillips. These actually started up during lockdown, during the period when monthly single-issue comics were somewhat on hiatus and not really being distributed. And popular writer and artist team Brubaker and Phillips, who have been working in the single issues and then collected in a book format for many years, like a lot of people in comics, decided to try graphic novels. So they launched this series called Reckless, based on sort of pulp novels. They had this character, Ethan Reckless, who is a fixer who people call up when they have a problem. And of course, inevitably, he's a sad man who lives in a movie theatre with a troubled past and a complicated relationship to his own history. And it takes place in the past. It's all written in flashback, with him sort of narrating it from the present day. And the stories have so far taken place, I think, mostly in the late 70s, 80s, and I think the next one's getting into the 90s. They're sort of moving slowly closer to the present day, and there are lots of hints about the tragic fate that awaits some of the characters, that sort of thing.
I would say that does sound very interesting. Yeah, I like this kind of, the psychology sounds quite complex, and I suppose there's a lot of seedy crime stuff. I guess during this sort of the 70s and 80s, the whole period of like white flight when inner cities became, there's this sort of this big rise in crime. So I can imagine there's like a lot of potential for like really good story writing in that.
Well, I think he lives in LA, so some of it's sort of based around the sort of the fringe of the entertainment industry and stuff. There's one where he was looking into this sort of rumoured satanic cult around the fringes of the film industry, which I think was very vaguely based on sort of satanic panic.
And I guess the Mansons to a degree as well.
Yeah, I think they were mentioned, yeah.
Yeah.
So and it's got the sort of the colours by Jacob Phillips are quite interesting, because before this, Brubaker and Sean Phillips did a series called Criminal, which was a series of fairly straight but very, very well done crime stories about, sad criminals getting slowly screwed over. And it was done in a very, I guess you'd say a very... Is traditional the right word? A sort of a crime palette you'd sort of expect. It was very brown, it was very black, it was very noiry and sad. And for Reckless, because it's sort of based in Hollywood, I guess, in this sort of incredibly sunny climate, they've gone for this sort of quite bright, almost sort of pastel shaded noir, which is quite interesting and quite distinct. And it gives the characters something interesting in a sea of noir crime comics, such as the one we'll be talking about later.
Yeah, I get the feeling that Ed Brubaker is someone we've discussed on the podcast before. I've just scanned through our archive and realised this is his 3rd feature in the recommendations section. You previously discussed Kill or Be Killed and Friend of the Devil.
Friend of the Devil is actually the 3rd Reckless. Is it the 3rd Reckless book? Sorry, the 2nd Reckless book. In fact, it's the one I just mentioned with the satanic panic stuff. So I'm somewhat repeating myself here. But yeah, I've now read all 5 books in the series, and it's really good. We also reviewed, at some point, I think Friday, the comic Ed Brubaker did with Marcos Martin, which is a comic about a YA Nancy Drew-esque detective who returns to her childhood town and looks into a murder.
Yes, I remember that. It was very good.
Yes, so Ed Brubaker, a big guy in crime comics, and he's done a lot of them, such as the ones we've just mentioned, and they are usually very good.
Yeah. He's a name that obviously gets circulated around as sort of like modern comics. Someone to be aware of, I guess. It looks like he does like sort of interesting work slightly outside the mainstream.
He had the sort of Marvel DC phase of his career. He wrote some Batman. He worked for Marvel. I think his most notable achievement in company-owned superhero comics was probably creating the Winter Soldier character. He wrote the storyline which brought Bucky back from the dead and established him as the Winter Soldier.
Oh, that's a classic, obviously, especially because it's now obviously firmly part of the MCU.
Yes. So he has given interviews in which he says that he made more money doing his cameo in the Winter Soldier movie, because he plays one of the scientists manhandling Bucky Barnes.
Oh, really?
Than he was actually paid by Marvel for creating the character. So possibly some irritation there on his part. But yes, he did create that character. It's a very good story. It's probably still one of the better recent Captain America stories, even though it's now about 20 years old.
I guess it's good that he's used, sort of success at a mainstream publisher to pursue authorial projects that reflect his sort of style and interests. I suppose it's not too different to lots of filmmakers who, cut their teeth in the mainstream with, again, MCU properties and things like that, and then go on to do interesting other films.
Well, yeah, it's not an unusual creative path for a comic writer to, do a bit of superhero Big Two stuff and use that as a springboard to try and get people to follow them to their personal projects, so it's an Image or whatever. And yeah, Brubaker Brubaker is one of the creators who has definitely made that direction work for him. At this point, he and Sean Phillips just do 1 or 2 graphic novels a year, and yeah, people buy them in large numbers. The Reckless series has been incredibly successful. Yeah, they did 5 in sort of the last 2.5 years, and now they're going to take I think they're doing something else next. They're taking a short break, but they assure us Reckless will return, which is good, because yeah, it's very good.
And it's not brought the timeline up to present day yet, so I guess there's more capacity for story.
No, the last book was in the late 80s, and it ended with a sort of editorial tease from Brubaker saying that in the next book we'll enter the 90s. So I'm excited to see what 90s Hollywood has to throw at him. Yeah, it's good sort of pulpy stuff. It feels very standalone adventure novel in a very sort of enjoyable way.
Yeah, sounds good, yeah. The sort of fringes of Hollywood has been explored in like crime films and crime TV shows like a lot over the years because, yeah, the sort of mix of the glamour and glitz of entertainment, people who really will do anything to be successful, and obviously people who would exploit that is obviously, yeah, again, great for crime shows and crime writing.
Yeah. He was the series called The Fade Outs, which was also a sort of noir story based in Hollywood. It was a bit more psychological and a bit less sort of pulpy and action orientated than Reckless. But for what it's worth, also very good. Also drawn by Sean Phillips. They're a very long-established team.
Next up, in this episode, we will be discussing Our Flag Means Death, a new comedy series from HBO and shown on the BBC in the UK. Set in the early 18th century during the golden age of piracy, the show follows the exploits of Stede Bonnet, the gentleman pirate, who, incredibly, was a real person, who was a wealthy landowner who became a pirate. This show stars Rhys Darby, Taika Waititi, Joel Fry, Gus Kahn, Samson Kayo, Ewan Bremer and Rory Kinnear, and the show follows the adventures of the crew of misfits aboard the Revenge as they tangle with pirate queens, the British Navy, and legendary pirate Blackbeard. We've seen the first season of this new show. Nick, what did you think of it?
Yeah, I liked this. I didn't love it, which felt mildly disappointing after all the hype on the old timeline. Because yes, this show has been built up heavily by the many people who have seen it in the States, and let's be honest, British people who have, aptly enough, pirated it since it aired.
That's very true.
Yep. Since it aired in the US quite a long time ago last year now. Like, if you read my top 10 TV shows blog on the website, you will note that I mentioned Our Flag Means Death as a possible notable omission that would have been maybe on the list had I been legally able to see it before the end of 2022. Well, now that I've seen it, probably not actually. Probably wouldn't have quite made the list. Might have been slipped into the honourable mentions. But yeah, it had a decent enough time. It felt reminiscent of Ted Lasso in that it's perhaps more a rom-com than a sitcom. Like, you're not necessarily watching it for incredibly complicated comedy and intelligent farce. It's more sort of the hope that the likeable characters can find some happiness in this crazy world, with a sort of regular quips and silly absurd moments thrown in for entertainment. And it does work on that level, especially just sort of the core romance. Like, the core of this show, which Alistair didn't mention, but I'm going to mention it anyway, even though it's arguably kind of a spoiler, because it's basically the point of the whole series, is the sort of romance between Rhys Darby's Stede Bonnet and Taika Waititi's Blackbeard. And they're both very, very good. They both bring a lot of presence, but very different energy. Especially Taika Waititi, who has a lot of presence in this. Like, it's some of the best acting I've ever seen from him. I've mostly seen him doing quite laid-back comedy roles before, and there's a lot of intensity in the Blackbeard portrayal. This is a very, very good performance. It's almost surprising that this is a guy whose prime job is directing. And Rhys Darby, although he doesn't get quite as much brooding to do, also does a good job of parlaying the sort of clueless vibe he's always had before from his previous parts, like Murray in Concords, into this sort of, I guess, a version of the sort of lovable Hugh Grant, bumbling, awkward rom-com trope. And yeah, it works, it's fun, it's endearing, it's likeable. Everyone is very nice and you want them to do well. Even the characters who are dicks are kind of dicks for an understandable reason. Yeah, it's a nice fun show. It's very entertaining, it's very easy to watch along and root for. I didn't personally think it was a masterpiece, but I had a nice time.
Yeah, it is certainly a fun show, and it is funny. The episodes are very watchable, sort of short, 20 minutes sort of comedy. You know, there's always a good sort of comedy set piece in like each episode. But yeah, I think I've been spoiled for good comedy recently, especially with shows like Derry Girls and Ghosts, when it's very much kind of like joke. Again, this sort of like 40 Towers level of kind of joke density. And, you know, that's a very, very high standard of comedy to hold things to. This show isn't as funny as some of the really, I guess, recent comedy stuff we've been reviewing. And when I watch, I normally lean towards drama, so I watch less comedy, so maybe my perceptions have been skewed by Ghosts and Derry Girls. And if someone was sitting there saying, I really want to watch a recent modern comedy, and if they hadn't seen Derry Girls or Ghosts, I would recommend watching those first. But this does have its own charm. I think it's really got the sort of silliness, and obviously I do enjoy like shows that like kind of go big on the silliness. Everyone's very sort of likeable And yeah, as you say, like, I think you hit the nail on the head when you've got that sort of rom-com-esque. You're rooting for the people to get together and, you know, everyone to be happy and the bad things to not happen. So it gives you that sort of warm, pleasant feeling, which is what you want from comedy a lot of the time.
Yeah. A lot of sitcoms, especially American sitcoms, have, you know, leaned into the likeable characters and the wanting them to overcome their personal trauma and their personal obstacles. You know, The Office US is probably still the most successful sitcom of the last couple of decades, and that obviously leans on that quite a lot. This isn't as good as The Office, to be clear, because The Office is funnier, but it's another one vaguely in that tradition. I think, yeah, like Alistair kind of said, I think what I mostly wanted from this was better and more jokes. Like, the characters are definitely there. The core romance and occasional dramatic moments work fine. I would have just maybe preferred a slightly higher joke density. There's a lot of characters in this, and they're all quite silly, and they all seem nice enough, but I'm not quite invested enough or entertained enough. To be honest, there are a lot of quite good comic actors in this who just don't do very much. I mean, Guz Khan is in this, and he's great. I've seen him in many things, and I've often laughed. He's a very funny guy, but he barely gets a line in this. He just sort of plays this largely silent Blackbeard sidekick. It's weird.
That is very much the case. I mean, one of the great strengths of this show is the cast. I mean, they've got HBO money, so it really does show. Obviously, we talked about Taika Waititi, and I agree with what you said about him. But yeah, obviously, Rhys Darby, Flight to the Conchords, he's absolutely hilarious. Ewan Brimmer of, you know, Train Spotting fame and Creation Story. I thought he was very funny. I mean, it's absolutely like unhinged Scotsman sidekick.
He was good. He only really got the spotlight a few times, but he was very good when he had it.
Yeah, absolutely stole it. Yeah, again, Rory Kinnear does amazing villain. He's excellent. Obviously, you saw him recently in Men, playing all the men. And yeah, I thought he did a really good job playing the villain, the British sea captain who's trying to hunt down Stede Bonnet. Yeah, obviously, yeah, there's lots of other strong people in the cast. Samson Kao, Joel Fry. I mean, there's lots of cameos as well. Will Arnett's in one episode. So they've got HBO money and they spent it well in the casting department. I agree with you saying it would be better if it had a greater density of jokes. I'm not trying to say it's not funny. It is funny. Like, you know, the jokes land and stuff. It's just, I don't know, it suffers by comparison to something like Derry Girls. And, you know, what we would say about Ghosts is that it's brilliant how they weave all of the ghosts into every episode and they all have something that contributes. Where this falls down is some of the crew will basically just kind of not really be in an episode, or they'll just have like kind of one line, you know, one or two lines, just very much part of the ensemble. They're not woven together into the story and into the comedy in every episode, which is what the sort of top tier sitcoms do.
Well, yeah, I mean, there are a couple of characters who have a sort of couple of personality traits set up, but then don't seem to really do much with it. Like, I think the guy played by Joel Fry is meant to be the guy who sort of sings, or occasionally sews, or does conspiracy theories. I'm not really sure, but it's very inconsistent, and he doesn't even get to do that much. It's strange. I mean, a lot of it is just that, you know, as you said, it's not a very long show. It's like 10 episodes, about 25 minutes or something. And, yeah, a lot of focus is pulled by the fact they're really putting a lot of effort into selling the central romance between Stede and Blackbeard. And they do a very good job of that, but possibly in terms of screen time, it's at the expense of it actually being funny. And, yeah, I don't know. The trouble is, it's so, apart from the central romance, it's just got such a complete vibe of silliness and ridiculousness. Like, you're clearly not meant to take a lot of this setup super seriously. Like, in real life, Blackbeard obviously did a lot of atrocities.
Yeah, well, Stede Bonnet was a real person who was a pirate, and so I assume killed people and stole their stuff.
Yeah, but obviously not being encouraged to think too hard about that. Or at least where we are, it's mostly played for sort of slapstick laughs. And so the show has to be at this sort of end of ridiculousness, but it doesn't include enough funny jokes to be just a constant romp, because it's too busy trying to do this semi-serious romance storyline. And the result is a weird mix, but then again, the semi-serious romance storyline does actually work to the extent that it's still a watchable show, and the jokes are funny enough that you still do the occasional chuckle. For a show that operates at this level of silliness, to bring in another show featuring at least one of the same cast members, I think he's in it once, Taika Waititi, What We Do in the Shadows, operates at a very high level of stupidity, and also has a very, very high level of actually funny jokes. And admittedly, it doesn't try to do seriousness at the same level as this show. But yeah, if the jokes were as good as the jokes in What We Do in the Shadows, I would not have a problem here.
Yeah, I think Taika Waititi did the original film.
Yeah, and he did a cameo at some point, or possibly 1 or 2 points. Yeah,
I think he's involved in the TV show, and he resurrects his character from the original film. The original film is good, but the TV show is better. I get what you mean. There's a sort of tension between the fact that they're pirates, which is obviously quite dark, and the kind of silly tone that they're aiming for. I think this is sort of smoothed over with a sort of layer of postmodern irony that's going on. I feel kind of like there was very much almost sort of like a wink and a nod to the audience that like this isn't supposed to be, I don't know, there's a sort of like the audience is in on the fact that this isn't believable. And it's kind of highlighted in the fact that there's a lot of modern dialogue, modern expressions like vibe and things like that. There's quite a lot of modern hairstyles.
Yeah, I listened to a different podcast about this, the Overinvested episode about it yesterday. They point out that on the episode where they're on sort of shore leave, relaxing on an island, Taika Waititi is just wandering around wearing a modern t-shirt.
And I believe, that's done with the whole kind of, this is, hinting to the audiences, they're basically like, this isn't believable, and there's a sort of, the audience is kind of in on it. I know the postmodern element of it. Strangely enough, though, there is a bit of the racism of the time. Probably not as bad as it would have been at the time, but like there are bits when like the British naval officers are quite racist towards the people of colour on Steve Bonnet's crew, even though his crew is a sort of melting pot of people from all over the world. And
I mean, the other aspect of his show is the sort of the found family. We're a group of people who were thrown together and we found our real home aspect, which is I think one of that and the sort of the central romance is one of the reasons why this show has become so big in a certain sort of fandom set. There's that sort of found family coming together to love each other thing. There's the high level of LGBTQ representation, which is obviously a good thing. There's a non-binary character, Jim, who is well portrayed. There's a couple of gay couples on the ship, and yeah, that stuff is all handled very well and very warmly, and in a very sort of, this is just the way they are and everyone accepts it way.
Yeah.
Which is nice. It's one of the many things that is nice about this show in a sort of pleasant rom-com way.
Yeah, I mean, that relates to a lot of classic sitcoms, again, Ghost does this as well, which is the kind of, we all live together and get along, and, there's a sort of nice melting pot of people, even though, like, people fall out and there's tension, and it always kind of brings it back to that. And also, I think that the queerness of the show is related to the sort of found family element. There is a lot of queer narratives, you see it in, like, film like Pride and lots of things like that, have this idea of, characters coming together in a sort of, found family that accepts and welcomes them. So I think the two are very closely related. Yeah, and I did like just how like really gay this show was. I think that was something that kind of marks it out as quite distinctive. And the kind of central character plot, although the characterization is quite, I don't know, it's not very complex, but it is quite nice to follow Steve Bonnet on his journey of like realizing that he's gay and in love with Blackbeard. It's kind of silly when put like that, but it's kind of sweet the way it's executed.
Yeah, and it is just quite sweet because, again, he's this sort of clueless Hugh Grant-esque character, in a way. So seeing him sort of slowly, awkwardly realise this in a sort of, oh my, way is quite well done. And, there's a very sweet scene, is this a spoiler? Maybe. Towards the end, where he returns to his old life briefly and sort of, I guess, comes out to his wife. And she, again, is just so thrilled for him that he's found someone who makes him happy. And, yeah, it's all very warm.
It's all very lovely, yeah. This show has been causing waves, pun intended, on social media. I've seen people in Britain chatting about it, partly because it's now available. Yeah, we've had a comment in on Twitter from Rachel Eyre, host of the Not Just Tentacles anime podcast, which she said that she got really into this show and really loved it. She says she's not even a piratey person normally. Yeah, and I do feel there's an element of, if you're there for the queerness of the show or the cast or the the kind of the comedy writing, kind of the piracy is sort of secondary to the appeal of the show. It's more about the characters and the story.
And there are some tentacles in one episode.
Yes, there is the Kraken.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So yeah, for all that I personally would have preferred more jokes, yeah, it's a lovely show. It's a very pleasant way to spend half an hour a day for a bit. I will pretty definitely watch season 2 when it airs. I'm curious to see how they'll develop it, if nothing else.
Yeah, I wonder if Rory Kinnear will be back playing the third triplet or something like that. Now from comedy to drama, where we will be discussing Newburn, a new comic from Chip Zdarsky. The comic follows the exploits of Easton Newburn, a private detective who works on behalf of all of New York's major crime families to settle disputes, keep the peace, and to delicately investigate crimes that could cause a gang war. When a man is murdered for stealing from the mafia, Newburn finds himself taking on a new assistant to whom he must educate in his unusual line of work. We've read the first volume of this comic. Nick, what did you think of it?
Yeah, no, good comic. A fun new take on the sort of gruff anti-hero private investigator genre, just when you thought one didn't exist. In a lot of ways, it's very sort of straight, very procedural crime, moving very sort of brutally and efficiently through its cases, whilst giving us these sort of breadcrumbs about the main character. To be honest, it's not actually a million miles away from Reckless in terms of the sort of crime protagonist thing, but Reckless is more sort of pulp adventure with a lot more rough and tumble action, whereas this is more sort of modern, straight, procedural crime investigation. One of these premises would be almost unremarkable on TV, because there's so many shows like this, and I wouldn't be entirely surprised if an adaptation of Newburn one day joins them. But seeing it done so well in comics without a genre twist being bolted on, like the detective actually being the Grim Reaper or something, is actually kind of a novelty. No, I enjoyed this a lot. It's another interesting work from Chip Zdarsky, who has done a lot of comics in a range of genres, and some of his work is sort of crime, and this is another good one from that, and also drawn entirely by Jacob Phillips, who again coloured Reckless. I've really slid these together well.
Yeah, that is well done. It is well done. Yeah, I really like this as a kind of sort of pulpy crime story. Like I say, there's on paper, hard-boiled private detective, crime families. It's one of those things then that there are no original concepts. It's all about the execution, and it's well executed. Each issue has its own crime story that's kind of resolved in that issue, which is, kind of the episodic nature is quite nice in this age of like arc TV and arc plotting. Yeah, they're just really tense, and it's a real page turner, which is, I think, the great strength of this comic.
Yeah, it's very dense. It's very sort of no fat on it. Like, it actually brings back the format that Fell was done in many years ago in the 2000s, in that the stories are actually only 16 pages each issue, when most comics are 20 to 22, 24, and it still gets a whole story into each one by basically using a very high panel density. Like, there's basically no like big one panel splash pages in Newburn. It's all about the sort of lots of panels packed in tight, giving you lots and lots of story, and it does it very well. It's very lean. He doesn't fuck about explaining or telegraphing stuff. He gets in, he gets out, so you have to be paying moderate attention to make sure you actually catch all the details.
Yeah. And there's always an interesting twist in each one, like I say, in only like a few pages. I did enjoy the sort of arc plot there has of the sort of introduction of a new companion to Newburn. It's a younger person he has to train in the trade. I almost got from it a sort of doctor companion vibe. I guess you've got a sort of lonely, older, knowledgeable person whose kind of unusual lifestyle leads him to be quite isolated, has to take on a normie and show them this kind of bizarre, strange world. I mean, there's even a bit, I think, when his assistant says to him, "You need someone to stop you going too far," and like, "That's why I'm here," sort of thing, which is pretty much exactly what Donna says to the doctor at one point.
I mean, it's a trope, isn't it? It's a classic. The older, lonely protagonist with a vaguely dark side, and the younger, fresh-faced, relatable sidekick whose job is to have things explained to them and stop the other guy from doing something horrible is kind of... Yeah, there's a lot of detective fiction with this. I myself may have once written between 1 and 5 novels in vaguely this subgenre. So Zdarsky hasn't made this up whole cloth, no. But it's a trope, and it's a very good use of that trope.
Well, I think it works well, and it's in dialogue with things in the past rather than sort of ripping them off. I mean this is like a positive thing. I mean, there's a lot of like Holmes and Watson vibes from it. And
well, yeah, that would have been the classic example that I failed to get to, yeah.
Yeah, but no, it's one of the things that kind of like made it interesting. Again, like the sort of the character dynamics are the kind of extra layer of that you're getting from this rather than just the crime plots. Yeah,
but actually one of the sort of Watsonian bits of it is the sort of diary entries from the sidekick character, Emily, which are sort of peppered through as sort of graphic design pages, which is another way that this comic keeps its density up and avoids using up precious comic panel space on long tracks of exposition, is by putting a lot of those tracks of exposition on her diary pages, which is a nice feature. Yeah,
and also they're usually breaking up scenes. They kind of like appear, when there's a sort of location transition or a time jump.
Yeah, and there's one episode where they go into flashback and the diary entries are also used as year jumps in a sort of quite fun, nicely designed way.
Yeah, it keeps you on track to what year it is, yeah. Yeah, I kind of, really liked the world it was set in. Again, a sort of like New York crime families vying. It's all a bit GTA, amongst other things. But, it's quite a bleak world, I suppose, which is part of the kind of noir setting, but there's this real bleakness to it, which is that everyone's corrupt, even the police are corrupt. At one point they say like the police are just another gang, something like that, and there's there's no higher authority that anyone follows, there's only money. There's a lot of bits when it says that the arrangement that Newburn has to keep the peace between the crime gangs is so that they can make money more efficiently, because gang wars are bad for business, and there's no higher authority, moral or otherwise, to appeal to, not the law, not the state, not any kind of religious thing. And I feel there's almost like a political statement in this. It seems like a very neoliberal way of looking at the world. The only thing that drives this system is money and the desire to make money. Any kind of peace or stability that's produced is to make money, and no one's really motivated by anything higher than that. Newburn has his own, I guess, moral code, which is kind of kept a bit vague or obscured from us. But there isn't a sense in this world that there's anything bigger or more valuable than just the cold pursuit of money.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, I guess it's an example of a sort of post-various Black Lives Matter rallies, the sort of discussion around propaganda sort of crime comic, in that this is one way to do a sort of cool anti-hero protagonist crime comic without making them a cop or making them, someone who works with the cops. Again, even though it's very tropey in a lot of ways, it's managed to find a genuinely new take on it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's very modern. Yeah, and I feel almost like it's almost like a commentary on our sort of money-obsessed world, which is kind of this is the kind of level of spiritual bankruptness it's driven us to. So very bleak existence, which that's something I liked about it a lot.
I mean, I guess this is arguably true of a lot of crime shows, but yeah, it's just about the sort of, I don't know, everyone just exists at the whim of this push and pull between these powerful gangs, and the only time civilians appear is when they're dead, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's nothing driving this other than just money. The racial politics are they're sort of touched on. Yeah, in the element, there's the assistant. She's a young black woman, and she was training to be a police woman and a police officer, and there's resistance from people that she knows that they don't trust the police, they don't like the police. So there is that element of racial politics in it. I guess for a set in New York with a modern kind of crime story, I feel that maybe the racial element could have been brought into it more. I mean, it is very efficient, tight storytelling, as you say. So, and it's not here to kind of make a point. But I suppose compared to something recently, it's a very different crime story. But We Own This Town really put the kind of racial politics at the centre of it. And there's possibly more scope to develop that here. But then, I guess this is only volume 1, so there's more scope for him to go into in the future.
I guess so. I mean, some of the main gangs he was dealing with were I don't know, was it the Chinese Triad and the Yakuza and the Russians? So there's elements of that in there, I suppose.
There's racial diversity, absolutely, which does reflect modern New York and things like that. Yeah, and they mentioned other gangs as well, smaller ones and things like that. But I guess it's mentioned, but it's not explored, I suppose, which is something that I was looking for. But as I say, we just read the first 4 issues of, I guess, something that's still running, so there's more scope to develop that. And I suppose the main point is that this is very focused on telling this tight, efficient, crime case of the week story, which is what the real strength of the comic is.
Yeah, as I say, it's the density, the tightness, the way it gets a single case in and just, always finds an interesting new way of using this world. Jacob Phillips does a great job of keeping the faces moving, keeping it very, very clear so you can sort of tear through these stories again in a sort of dense, tight way. Got some very good, crisp noir colours as well. It's a very nice looking comic.
Yeah, that's good. I like how it sort of moves through time quite effortlessly. Between issues, there's clearly been a jump of time as the assistants learned more about the job and the world this is set in. But it doesn't really tell you how long it's been and stuff. But there's clearly a sense of time passing you get from reading it.
Well, yeah, there's a couple where obviously something big has happened between them, and it's not always commented on or made a huge deal, but it does, create that sense that this isn't all just happening within a week or something. And I guess helps to create the sense that this assistant has become more part of Newburn's world, as they say in The Little Mermaid.
Oh, travelled a long way. We brought it back to the sea. Brought it back to the sea. Brought it back to the sea.
Yeah. The Little Mermaid and Newburn. Not works that will be often discussed together in critical essays, I imagine. But yeah, it's possibly not a life-changing transcendent masterpiece, and in terms of current Chip Zdarsky books, I think it's possibly being slightly overshadowed by Public Domain, a book I mentioned recently-ish in the recommendations section, which is maybe a bit more unique, whereas it's a genre piece, which, as I say, lives a lot within certain tropes, but it's very confident, it's very expertly done, and it's definitely a bit of a masterclass in sort of dense, efficient storytelling. So yeah, there's a lot here. Okay, and that was Moderate Fantasy Violence for this fortnight. Thank you very, very much for listening. If you want yet more from us, you can go to our website at moderatefantasyviolence.com and find our many, many, many past episodes, alarmingly close to 200, Jesus Christ, along with our various essays, deleted scenes and such. And if you enjoyed the experience, why not go to your podcast application of choice and leave us a nice 5-star review. Cheers. You can also find more of us on social media by going to Twitter, where we're at MFV Podcast, and by searching for Moderate Fantasy Violence on Facebook. You can get more from me on Twitter, where I'm at AlistairJRBall, and find more of my writing at redtrainblog.com. And you can find more from me at nickbryan.com on the internet, or at nickmb on Twitter, and there could be another comics crowdfunder any minute now. Well, at some point in the next 2 or 3 months anyway. And we will be back, of course, in 2 more weeks, when we will be taking on the Oscar Best Picture list with The Banshees of Inisherin and Triangle of Sadness. See you then. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.